Welcome to the serialized audiobook, The Detective, written by Scott Sigler and Matt Wallace, narrated by Scott Sigler. Hello, junkies. Welcome to episode 1 of a brand new podcast story, The Detective. This 10-episode novella is in the Siglerverse. It is in the era of the Galactic Football League. It is part of the GFL series. It features the character Frederico Esteban Guissepe Gonzaga, also known as Fred. Fred is a regular character in the GFL series. He is the favorite private detective of John Tweedy. He also works for Quentin Barnes in a variety of roles. He sometimes serves as the pilot of Quentin's interstellar yacht, the Hypatia. He has worked as a bodyguard for both Quentin and Quentin's sister, Janine. And he has worked as, of course, a private detective for Quentin. Quentin assigned him with the task of finding Quentin's family. As you may know from the GFL story, Quentin grew up as an orphan on the planet of Mikovy, and he has always been looking for his family. He doesn't know who they are, if they're alive, etc. Frederico's search for Quentin's family is this story you're about to listen to. But this story is also about Frederico's origin and his background. How did he come to have such a wide array of skills? He can be a starship captain. He can be a combat pilot. He's a master of disguise. Of course, he's a very good private investigator, and he is a badass hand-to-hand combatant. How did he get to be this way? You will find out in this book. And this book, The Detective, is read by me because it is a GFL property. I read all of the GFL properties. The Detective was co-written with the fantastic Matt Wallace, who is the author of the Sin du Jour series. I advise you check that out. Matt's also my co-author for the GFL books Title Fight and The Reef. So I know I'm biased. I know I co-wrote this story, but I have to be honest. I love The Detective. In the GFL novels, Fred is kind of a bright, shiny character. His backstory, however, is very unshiny. Like Quentin, Fred is from the Purist Nation, which is an incredibly repressive theocracy. Fred's politics and natural desires very much go against this theocracy's dictates. So I think if you grew up at all feeling like an outcast, or feeling like you weren't just different, but you were hated in a way for being who you are, you might identify with Fred in this story. Fred has had a hard road of things. Even as he hunts for the family of Quentin Barnes, we will learn of his brutal backstory. After the episode, I will tell you about the writers' conference I'm doing as this episode drops. And here we go with episode number 1 of The Detective. I hope you dig it. Introduction. The Detective is a Galactic Football League novel, which is part of the Siglerverse timeline. In the timeline, this novella takes place from roughly March 2683 to March 2684. Where applicable, the chapters are named to match the action in the All-Pro, which is Book 3 in the Galactic Football League series. The Detective actually begins, however, on unknown dates during Book 2, The Starter. In terms of the GFL timeline, The Detective runs from roughly Week 7 of the 2683 regular season in The Starter through Week 10 of the 2684 regular season in The All-Pro. You can enjoy The Detective on its own or as part of the overall Galactic Football League series. Book 1. The Mines of Mikovy. Chapter 1. Caleb. Caleb Cole had come to realize there was music in the mines of Mikovy if you had the right ears with which to hear it. Music made with a melody of emotion, often dark, often hopeless, punctuated by the percussion of sharp steel points colliding with stone, over and over again, hundreds of thousands of times a day. Mikovy music was not the syncopated song of a well-rehearsed band. You would find no easy meter, no constant rhythm, no metallic chorus of pickaxes falling in perfect time with one another. The sound of each tool was as individual as the man who held it. And if a unified beat ever spontaneously arose, that beat vanished in reverb generated by the endless catacombs. Tens of thousands of pickaxes chewed at the rock, the ancient accretion of that planet destroyed by the steady swing of men, just as a colony of termites slowly erode the tallest of trees. Among those countless swings, the loudest concussions came from the young and the strong, each of their blows landing like the wrath of some vengeful god. The young ones hated the mines the most. The young ones always seemed to be waiting for someone to scream for rebellion so they could bury the chipped ends of their picks into the foreman's skull. The young ones, you see, had not yet been fully beaten down. They had that great curse of life on Makovy, the curse of believing that they were special, that they could change things, that someday they could escape. The older miners didn't swing with as much vengeance. They relied on wisdom, on experience, carefully choosing the target of each swing for maximum effect with minimum effort. Their axes fell in the slow, slouching toward Bethlehem rhythm of the beaten down and the broken. Though their bodies were still strong for the most part, they had come to accept that either their short lives would forever be spent here and had willingly given their fighting spirit to the mines, or that the mines had slowly strangled their souls, a slow death that they never saw coming until the battle was already over. Finally, and nothing but a faded note in all of that, there were pickaxes dropped so weakly they barely registered, like the clink of glasses from an insincere toast. These were the swings of the old and decrepit, those soon to give their last breath to the minds that had eaten their youth, their manhood, their lives. Caleb heard all these distinct notes. He recognized each sound for what it was and what it said about the man behind it. He couldn't help that. He couldn't turn his powers of observation off any more than he could stop breathing. Fortunately, the other dirty, sweating men didn't seem to hear the music within the noise, didn't hear the orchestra of stone and steel. If they did, they certainly didn't find any human pathos in it. He was glad of that. If they could hear the way he heard, they might get wise to the fact that Caleb Cole didn't swing his pick like the standard lifer mine worker. His swing was steady and dependable, measured, but performed with obvious power. It was the swing of a man doing a dead-on impression of a Makovy miner, wholly convincing to anyone watching him work, but there was nothing of the wretched place in his blood. Caleb Cole knew that, probably, he would not die here. The miners took water once an hour. Hunchbacked old women and the occasional homely young maid came through the stone rows with buckets of questionable hydration. In an age when many races traveled between the stars faster than the very light from those stars, on Makovy they were still brought tepid water in leaky buckets made of wood. As the men in Caleb's section paused in their labor to gratefully drink, he turned to the burly miner next to him and leaned tiredly on the haft of his pickaxe. "From humble beginnings, eh?" Caleb said to the man. The worker's face wrinkled. "What do you mean?" Caleb gestured to the chipped stone tunnel around them. "Didn't that star quarterback start out just like this, breaking rocks and mines?" Caleb paused, as if trying to remember a name, then snapped his fingers in an affected triumph. "Quentin Barnes, that's the guy." The miner stared at him blankly. "How would I know?" "Huh," Caleb said. "I thought everyone here was a Raiders fan." The worker shrugged as he took a water ladle from a hunchbacked woman with one good eye. "I like the Raiders well enough," he said, then took a sip. "But all I know of Barnes are the stories people tell, and most of those are lies. He's orphan scum like me. Heard he was a houseboy for some restaurant owner. Got to eat all he wanted." Those last words said with bitterness, envy. Miner seemed far more jealous of Barnes's past as a well-fed kid than his current status as a rich, intergalactic sports star. "Lucky guy," Caleb said. "You ever meet him?" "Barnes? No, wouldn't wanna. Football's for pretty boys and that demon trash." He punctuated the statement by spitting his final mouthful of water onto the rocks at their feet. Caleb didn't press the man further. He never pressed any of them too hard on the subject. Word would start to get around that he seemed overly interested in digging into rising superstar quarterback Quentin Barnes' humble beginnings. But he did keep asking the question, floating that name to every man swinging an axe throughout the hollowed pits in which he'd been busting rocks for the last 2 weeks. Most didn't know Barnes. Many claimed to, but Caleb saw through their grandiose tales of drinking and womanizing, of bar fights and best friend boasts. Sometimes, however, he met a lifer who told the truth. And sometimes he met a miner who knew more than just the legend. Chapter 2. Kearney. The crowd of mine workers, perhaps 100 total, surrounded a 15-foot diameter circle hastily sketched on the quarry's rock floor. Their cheers, drunken and ecstatic and lusting for blood, slid up the 100-foot granite walls that cragged in every direction. When those cheers reached the top, where anyone with a badge or a plasma rifle, or both, might hear, the sound was no more than the babbling of running water. The workers passed around liters of a homebrew concoction they called stinger juice. It tasted dirty and toxic and vaguely of fermented fruit. They swilled it from bags and stained coffee tins. A few sipped from sleek composite containers of synthesized booze purchased at the company store, but those were a luxury item. Most of the boys looked down on the stuff. Inside the circle, 2 of their fellow miners bashed each other with fists and feet wrapped in tough, braided strands of rope. Both men had stripped down to the same grimy work pants that everyone wore. Each man was already bloodied in several places. Bright purple patches were blossoming on their torsos. The goal here was not to knock your man down or even out. The goal was to force him outside the circle. The first man to take 3 tumbles over the line was the loser. When it was about being knocked out of the circle, there were fewer questions as to who won. The fights also didn't go on forever, and that reduced fatalities. It didn't eliminate them, but still, reducing them was a good thing. Caleb watched. Not with the drunken cheering of most, but rather with the analytical stare of someone who knew how to scrap, someone who analyzed the moves and reactions of each fighter. Caleb wasn't the only one. All around the circle, up on rocks and crags in the wall, were men with that same intensity. Head tilted down slightly, eyes staring hard, bodies making the almost imperceptible motions left or right, leaning front or back, as if their bodies automatically reacted to each punch, each kick, each opportunity to slide a blow through a lazy defense. Caleb's body moved as well. Tiny twitches that would be blocks and strikes were he down in the ring. He really didn't want to take on either man, though. One was a bull-shouldered beast with skin the color of charcoal. His muscles looked like industrial cable tied into knots and covered with skin that didn't quite fit. He was an imposing son of a round bug, to say the least. His opponent, however, was an absolute giant. He dwarfed the other man. Caleb might have believed he was heavy G if not for his complete lack of caveman features. His arms also extended down to his hips, as opposed to nearly dragging on the ground like a heavy G's. The big fighter's eyes were some of the sharpest Caleb had come across. They held a predatory sharpness, certainly, but there was also calculation. The steady, scanning gaze of a strategist planning moves ahead of moves. Caleb had seen that look in the eyes of men who architected military battles and surgical strikes. The bigger fighter had a shaved head, mottled by nasty scars Caleb couldn't identify, and Caleb knew a few things about the marks left by severe trauma. This hulk of a human had a story to him. But it wasn't that man's story that had brought Caleb to the mines. He could watch fights anytime. He had to get back to work. Caleb downed several fingers of the fermented miner's brew and watched the scarred man unleash a shocking quick flurry of 4 punches, 3 of which landed, leaving his opponent dazed and staggering. The giant capitalized with a leaping front kick that sent the other man flying outside the circle for the second time. He was now ahead 2-0. Caleb took another sip and passed the half-full cup in his hand to Carney, who quickly chugged the rest. Caleb elbowed him in the side lightly. "Way to be a hog, young man." "You sip like a girl," Carney replied, laughing. "I figured it was time to show you how it's done." He met Carney his first day working the mine. Caleb had watched how the other miners worked a pickaxe and a sledgehammer, skills picked up mostly by observation and a little bit of repetition. Carney, however, had come over right away and shown Caleb how to properly hold his right hand all the way up to the hammerhead on the upswing, then slide it down to the bottom on the downswing to create maximum velocity. It was a small trick, but it made a significant difference. More importantly, Carney had done it quietly, so as not to draw attention to Caleb's rookie mistakes. A tiny bit of kindness in a place that was not kind. Caleb had taken to the kid right away. Carney was tough, and he did the job without complaint, but there was an openness about him that was unusual in this place. He had offered to show Caleb the ropes of Ringgold Incorporated's mining operation. Without knowing it, Carney had provided more useful information than Caleb had gathered from a dozen other workers. "He's getting back in the circle," Carney said. He was excited. People love to watch other people fight. The bull-shouldered black man drove in. Big Bald caught him coming and twisted at the same time, using the other man's momentum against him, taking him to the edge of the circle. Such balance and speed for a man of that size. The bald one reminded Caleb of the late, great MMA champion Kyle the Heretic North. But Kyle North was gone, killed along with his quith opponent, Korak the Cutter, in the greatest fight Caleb had ever witnessed. Caleb had never thought much of mixed martial artists. He had been a soldier once, a real warrior. Warriors fought wars, not in rings for drunken fans. But the night of that title fight, watching a human and a quith warrior clash like gods, like the greatest specimens their respective species had ever produced, Caleb couldn't deny he was seeing 2 true warriors go at it. No, the big miner wasn't Kyle North, but he had the same qualities. Caleb might have thought him military trained, but his style was too brutal. It was force over efficiency. Big Bald could have delivered another crushing blow, could have thrown elbows and knees, could have lifted his opponent, but he just pushed one more time, reaching out with his left foot to block the bull-shouldered man's heel. Bull-shouldered tried to step back, but he could not. He fell, landing outside of the ring. There were cheers and boos throughout the quarry. It all depended on whom the miner in question had bet on. Caleb leaned closer to Carney, shouted to be heard over the din of the crowd. "I'm calling it a night." Carney's face wrinkled in complaint. "What are you talking about? There's going to be at least 3 more fights." Caleb shook his head. "Nah, I'm done." Before he turned to walk away, Caleb clapped his hand on Carney's shoulder in a parting gesture. Without meaning to, he let his hand linger there. It was only a microsecond, but they both took notice of it. The look on Carney's face surprised him. There was no disapproval, nothing but a guarded kind of interest in what was happening. It was over in the span of a breath, and Caleb didn't hang around to see how Carney's face might have changed when he took his hand away. He left the quarry quickly, willing his stomach to unknot with every step. Chapter 3. Frederico. A mile above the jungle canopy, the Archangel is spinning out in a corkscrew of black smoke that's being stretched farther and farther downward like a spiral staircase to hell. Against the starless night, the smoke is invisible, as is the Archangel itself. Only the fires burning from its hulking dual jets can be seen from the ground. A moment later, Frederico Esteban Guissepe Gonzaga has a murderous stranglehold on the flight stick as he tries to wrestle the bird under some kind of control. His right hand is engulfed in flame, but he doesn't feel the burn, doesn't register the skin bubbling and blackening and peeling. He doesn't feel it because that part isn't real. One eye watches the burning hand that holds the flight stick, while the other spies the manic dance of his instrument gauges. The stick is locked in mechanical rigor mortis. He pulls until the sinew in his arms almost snaps, but the dying ship won't respond. It creeps closer to terminal velocity. The crew chief is screaming at him from the rear of the copter. Spittle flies from a dark depression in the older man's graying beard, but Frederico can't hear him. He can't hear anything except the warning klaxons, the hot snap of flames crackling all around, and the sound of pure, flesh-stripping G-force thundering around his bird. Frederico can't hear the words, but he doesn't need to. The crew chief is a man as hard as the steel plates beneath their feet. He can strip a copter down to its rivets and then put it back together again blindfolded and without the hand-rolled cigarette falling from his lips. Nothing that happens on a copter can faze him. The way he's screaming can only mean one thing. They're going down, and there's nothing that anyone, including and especially Rico, can do about it. All he can do is try and pick the spot where. He aims for the trees. "You should let it go," Loa tells him, as it always does. "Let this whole scene slip from your mind's eye before the crash. You need not see the rest, not again." The Loa hovers somewhere in the upper plates of the Archangel's cockpit, present but removed from this moment in time. It's just an observer, an absurd one at that. A tiny, snake-like man-thing with a long skull face and a dusty stovepipe top hat. It doesn't belong here, and Rico knows that. A split second later, the Archangel's whirling blades slice through the jungle canopy. The copter's formerly sleek and currently burning body follows. It slams against what feels like a mile of branches and bark, each jolt enough to crush bone against any one of the interior's hundreds of steely edges. By the time it hits the ground, the shuddering impact of the trees has slowed its velocity by more than 2/3. Enough to stop Rico from being smashed to paste, but not enough to stop the machine from hitting the ground so hard it looks like a grotesque tin can that's been kicked around by a schoolyard full of bullies. The crash stuns him, tries to make his restraints cut him to pieces. He coughs, not sure where he is. When the flames lick the outside of his left leg, he remembers. Unlike the hand he watched sizzle and bubble, this fire is real. He feels the heat. Reality comes back in one ugly bastard of a wave. He's alive. His leg is badly damaged, pinned under a fallen ammo crate. He's hurt, but he's alive. If he can get out of here and escape the fire, he might just stay that way. "It's a good feeling, no?" the Loa asks. It's sitting on his shoulder now, whispering like some devil in his ear. "To survive, to brave the fire and metal, and realize that you're still here?" Rico ignores him. He looks around the Archangel's imploded interior. The rest of the crew, the strike team they were carrying, all dead. Even the chief. Rico feels a pang of loss when he sees the old man's body. That pang makes no sense. He barely knew the chief. He knew the chief was 2 months from retiring. Maybe that's what made his death just a little bit more tragic than the others. Outside the hull, somewhere beyond the fire that wants to cook his leg medium well, Rico hears a voice. He hears shuffling. It's not coming from the Archangel. It's in the jungle outside. They are coming for him. They shot down his bird, and now they're coming to finish him off. "You sure about that now?" the Loa asks. "You're hurt and scared and angry. You sure you know who's out there?" But Rico knows. It's the enemy. and now they're clambering over the smoking remains of his bird and about to push through the hatch a few feet away. Rico dislodges his leg, leaving skin and bone fragments and a pint of blood under the seat. His pants leg is on fire. He slaps at it, putting out the flames even as his hands hit hard against blistering flesh. It takes more strength than most men will ever know not to scream. He pulls his damaged leg along with the rest of his body toward the hatch. The enemy soldier on the other side is trying to jimmy it open. Rico reaches for the nearest carbine, but sees the barrel is bent. The thing is useless. He unsheaths his knife. The steel and the fabric of the scabbard create a whisper in the dark. The hatch is opening. Rico is poised to strike. "Are you sure?" the Loa asks again, as if it matters, as if Rico can stop time and reorder the universe to change the next few seconds. The hatch drops, and the shadow-draped form of his enemy begins to slither through it. Rico knifes him the way he was trained, hacking and slashing, ignoring the blood and the flailing and the screams until the thing in front of him stops moving. Rico's arms go still. There's dark red juice on his hands, up and down the sleeves of his flight jacket. He's breathing like a sprinter, and if anyone could see his eyes, they'd be as crazed and as wild as anything that stalks the jungle. "Get ready, son," the Loa warns him. "Here it comes, again." The fire rises, and Rico sees his enemy's face. It's not a soldier. It's a scavenger. It's a woman of 90 pounds with threads of gray hair glinting in the firelight. Just some villager who saw the crash and came to pillage the wreck. Or worse. High One help him. So much worse. Maybe she came to help the survivors. She's dead. She looks surprised. So surprised. "I told you to let it go," the Loa taunts him. But Rico can't do that. He holds on, gripping her ragged clothes in his scorched fists and sobbing hysterically. "Stay here, then. The fire is rising. It'll hit the reserve tanks in just a second. You won't feel a thing. And when it's over, you'll never have to come here again." Rico can't do that either, because that's not how it happened. So, for the 1,000th time, he tears his fists from the woman's limp body, taking wads of bloody cloth with them. He crawls from the wreckage and slithers into the darkness beyond the firelight. When the Archangel explodes, it bathes the jungle in orange and red. It looks like an oil painting of exquisite beauty. Then he hears the enemy. The real enemy. "They're coming," the Loa says. The knife is still clenched in Rico's fist. He'll stay low to the ground. He'll slash Achilles' tendons and pick them off one by one. They don't understand the monster that's just been made there in the flames. But they will. Moments before they all die, they will. Chapter 4. Caleb dies. There was no shrieking in the darkness. There was no bolting upright in his bed, drenched in sweat. There was no twisting anguish on his face or running from the devil racing of his heart. Caleb simply woke up. His eyelids opened in one smooth, sudden motion. He was awake and alert, and he remembered everything about the dream, the incident that gave birth to the dream, and where he was now. The Loa was gone, as he knew it would be, always knows it will be. But somehow, when the dream comes, Caleb never fails to check the dark corners and shadowy rafters of whatever room in which he finds himself. He imagined the Loa. No one is more aware than him that it's not real. But it lives in the places Caleb visits more than any other. Caleb spends more time with the Loa than with anyone else, and that makes it hard to sequester it from reality. It's about control. He created the Loa to help control the dreams, to keep himself lucid during each replay, each memory reconvened. He learned about the Loa from a squadmate, Red Bizik. Red hid his voodoo upbringing the way Caleb hid his own desires. They sensed that extra layer in each other, sensed that there was a secret that must be hidden, and because of the desperate human need to share, magnified by a long night of drinking, they had told each other their true nature. Those truths could have gotten them killed. If anyone in the unit ever found out, word could have spread. Some were sympathetic, some didn't care, but most in the service would have persecuted them until someone stacked wood for a fire. In effect, the need to be true to at least someone meant they had entrusted their lives to one another. The act of confession had bonded Caleb and Red, a bond deeper than that of family, than that of lovers, than that of comrades. Secrets drown you. Telling someone, taking the chance that they won't tell anyone else, that is like sliding your head above the surface to take a breath to stay alive. Voodoo. Red would have burned for that, no question. Caleb had kept the secret. And for that trust, when the dreams threatened to drive Caleb to madness, Red had taught him how to conjure the Loa. It was all superstitious nonsense, but Caleb had been so desperate for a way out that he'd tried it. He still didn't believe in the supernatural, but there had to be some science to dream control because the Loa worked. The Loa became Caleb's dream guide. The ugly little man tied Caleb to the present, reminded him the dreams were nothing more than memory molded by guilt and shame until it formed a nightmare. Caleb stared at the ceiling. He'd sacked out in a 2-room shack that was connected to dozens upon dozens of others like it. Powerful magnets making a roof lock to a floor lock to a roof, the shack stacked together like a child's set of wooden blocks. Each identical shack had a narrow walkway at the base and a ladder leading up to the face. Caleb had to climb 4 ladders to reach his walkway, which was so wobbly it felt like it might collapse at any moment. This is how Ringgold Incorporated, and every other mining outfit, provided housing to its workers. The walls were sheet metal, and the roof couldn't protect its tenants from a thimble of rain, let alone an actual downpour. Still, the company etches its logo, twin green crescents, on every shack, perhaps just to give the workers a nightly reminder of who puts that roof over their heads. Caleb climbed out of his shabby cot. In the other room, which was little more than a closet, there was a makeshift grooming station. Each shack had pipes that were supposed to connect to a central pump, but enough of the pipes were broken that Ringgold just gave up and had 2 liters of water delivered to each shed each day. How the miners used that water was up to them. At least the plumbing worked in the communal showers. Those facilities were 3 ladders down, 4 walkways to the right. He poured half a liter of water into the sink basin, then splashed his face several times. Above the basin, someone before him had nailed a broken piece of mirror to the wall. Caleb stared at his dripping face, at his torso. He still had the scars. Dozens of them. A topographic map of his adventures, and the wounds that came with them. An entire world of pain that was his and his alone. For a moment, he put away Caleb Cole and let the man who had earned all of those scars come flooding back to his mind and body. "My name is Frederico Esteban Guissepe Gonzaga," he said to his reflection. "I am a private investigator. I live in Ionath City on planet Ionath in the Quith Concordia." He repeated it. Then he repeated it again. By the 3rd time he said it, the name and occupation started to feel real again, instead of just another shade, another mask, another subterfuge Fred used in his work. A knock that threatened to rattle the shack's tin sheet door off its single hinge drew his gaze from the broken mirror. Fred instantly blinked away his true self and Caleb Cole rushed in to fill the void. He moved out of the wash closet and opened the door. Carney stood there. They just stared at each other for a moment, then Carney spoke. "You're not coming back to the mine tomorrow, are you?" Caleb wasn't. His work here was almost done, but he hadn't sent a word to anyone, not even Carney. "How'd you figure that?" "You didn't pick up your store tokens for the week," Carney said. "If you're not planning to eat at the company store, then you must be bolting." Caleb died with those words. There was no point in keeping him alive. He'd served his purpose, and Carney had seen through him. Fred grinned a little, despite himself. "You're too smart to spend the rest of your life swinging a pick, Carn." "What choice I got?" "Always a choice." Carney shrugged. "I suppose. I'm right then? About you bolting?" Fred nodded. Carney almost didn't ask, but Fred knew the question was coming. Take away the possibility of tomorrow, and most men will take their last chance on tonight. The kid smiled. "Can I come in for a while?" There was no real debate. Fred knew he would turn Carney away, but still, he hesitated. It would have been nice. Finally, he said, "Look, man, I know why you're here. I understand, but it's not going to happen." "Oh." Carney didn't look dejected, just confused. "Was I wrong? I mean..." "You're not wrong. You just got the wrong time." "When's the right time, then?" "If I knew, I'd tell you, but it ain't now." Carney only nodded, sadly. They didn't say goodbye, and Fred didn't wait till morning to leave the mines. He was gone less than an hour later. That's it for episode number 1 of The Detective. We now know part of Fred's mastery of disguise comes from his ability to lose himself in a character. Sometimes it's hard for him to know who he actually is when he's doing one of these roles. Caleb Cole has served his purposes, but now Fred is firmly back in control. And now that Fred has some info, we will see what he does in episode 2 when he will meet the man who saved the life of a young Quentin Barnes. Fred will meet Mr. Sam. Before the episode, I told you I would tell you about the Writers' Conference. I recorded this episode early as I'm currently at the Mendocino Coast Writers' Conference in Mendocino, California. I'm there because I'm a horribly important author, you see. I must spread my knowledge upon the faces of other writers. This is the first Writers' Conference I've done in a long time. So this is a new thing for A Real Girl and I. She is with me, as always, on these business endeavors. Writers' conferences are a way for me to give back to the publishing industry. Maybe make a little money, sure. But to be honest, the money we make from one of these comes at a cost of at least a week's worth of work on our own books. So it is a wash, if not an outright loss. We would make more money if we were just pounding away on our own books for that week or that 2 weeks. So we do it because it's part of me trying to find a way to help other writers, because I got a big leg up when I got started. Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child had written Relic and Reliquary. Of course, now they're world-famous, big-time authors. And they were definitely on the up at that point. The Relic movie was out. I like the Relic movie, by the way. You should check it out. So they had 2 books out, 1 movie. They were on their way to superstardom. But they still helped me out, a complete nobody. I just emailed them out of the blue, asking noob questions, and they were kind enough to take their time to help me out. They didn't do a lot. They didn't take me under their wing. They merely answered a couple of emails. But it was extremely encouraging to get any kind of encouragement. It was encouraging to get encouragement. It was encouraging to get any kind of support at all from people who are made in the industry. And I've tried to never, ever forget that feeling and what it did for my motivation and how it kept me going through some tough times when it felt like I should just give up. I was never going to become a pro writer. And of course, Lincoln Child gave me a cover blurb for Earthcore back when it was just a tiny little indie novel. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew what Earthcore was. He gave me a cover blurb even before the podcast started. So he helped give my career an early little boost. So because of that, A Real Girl and I try to give back and pay that support forward. We don't have a lot of time to do that, though. So a writers' conference like this, where I can take the precious time I have available and sit down with 50, 20, even 30 writers who are serious enough to drop $450 and a weekend of their precious time to learn more about writing in the industry. That's a way for A&I to help some peeps who are very serious about their goals. So that time we do take provides high impact benefit to the highest number of people. Anyway, that's why I'm at the Writers' Conference. And by the time this episode drops, I'm already done with the Writers' Conference. And I am on my way to Los Angeles, California, to practice a new pitch for the Nocturnal TV series. Keep in mind, just a pitch. No one is buying the show yet. It's not option. It's not nothing. We're just sharpening the saw, coming up with a new strategy. If you haven't read my book, Nocturnal, and you're still listening to me ramble, you want to go get my book, Nocturnal. If you want to know more about the Nocturnal pitch, keep listening to the podcast, and as information comes up, I will share it on this very feed. So that's it for this week. Until next week, I will talk to you all real soon. You have been listening to The Detective, a Galactic Football League novella. The Detective is also available as an ebook and as a full-length audiobook. If you want the whole story with no waiting, visit scottsigler.com/The Detective for links to Amazon, Audible, and more. Follow Scott on Instagram and Twitter, where he is at Scott Sigler, one word, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Scott Sigler. The Detective audiobook was directed by AB Kovacs and engineered by Steve Riekeberg. Copyright 2019, Empty Set Entertainment, all rights reserved. Theme music is from the band Amps and Volts.